welcome to the Culture Cast. I'm Chris Stashu, and I am joined once again by everyone's favorite horror fan, Mr. Eric Niss. Simply stunning.
Motherfuckers!
Wow, that's really special. Yeah, you're really excited, aren't you?
Yeah, hold your applause until the end, people. I know it's going to be hard. I know that I am, but we can make it through this together.
Boy, this is going to be a long Culture Cast. On this Culture Cast, we're going to be talking... we're going to be kicking off Horrortober for The Awakening. With
The Awakening.
The Awakening. With a look at Stephen Cognetti's Hell House...
Did Batman just show up to the podcast?
No, well, there is no one cast as Batman.
Where is it?
No. We're going to be taking a look at Stephen Cognetti's Hell House LLC from 2015 and Hell House LLC 2, The Abbadon Hotel, which was released last month, September 2018, exclusively on Shudder. We also have an interview with the director of both films. And if you can't tell, Horrortober for The Awakening, we're going to be focusing solely on found footage horror movies, which, yes, have gotten a very bad rap, and I think undeservedly so, especially with the films we're going to be talking about this month. So let's get right into Hell House LLC. The film is directed and written by Stephen Cognetti and stars Gore Abrams, Alice Balke, and Danny Bellini. The film centers around a group of friends who go to Abbadon, New York to open up a haunted house inside of an old abandoned hotel.
What happened that night at the Abbadon Hotel? What is that?
It's everything.
Sarah, have you watched those?
No.
So you have no idea what's on them?
How beautiful is this?
Hell House.
Look, there it is. Whew.
There we go.
What was that?
I don't know.
You have heard the rumors about this.
There are no rumors
What
about
rumors?
this place. No rumors. We talked about this.
It's supposed to be haunted.
All right, dude, lock me in. Cool, dude.
Godspeed.
Hey, man. How many freaks did we have?
3 freaks. What's going on?
Are you sure?
5. Let me out! Let me out, Tony!
It was when we started sleeping there that things started to change.
Back. You heard that, right? I'm telling you, we have to call it off right now.
We have no business being here. Alex is more confident than ever.
I think we're next.
Go back up! Go back up! Hurry! Hurry!
All right, Eric, so I'm curious. You and I had both seen this film before, and obviously we put this list together this month together, so there was a reason we're watching this movie. I'm curious, what do you think revisiting Hell House LLC for the first time in a while?
It's not my favorite, if I'm being honest. There are much, much worse found footage movies out there. Hell House LLC 2 being one of them, but we'll get to that when we get to that. But I like the movie in concept, and I find that is my issue with a lot of found footage movies. I feel like their concept sort of like overextends like their actual reach or their actual like ability to follow through on the concept and make something that's actually scary and realistic while being creepy and weird and supernatural and all of that stuff. Don't get me wrong, there are some cool moments in this movie and some good scares, but it's all very like, I've seen this before in other found footage horror movies type of thing. This movie does it better than a lot of them. And I remember when this movie came out, there was a lot of, I don't know, what's the word that I'm looking for?
Hype?
Yeah, that's the word. Yeah. In my brain, I just went for all the old school words for hype. Just like there was a lot of kerfuffle around it. There was a lot of, whatever. There was a lot of hullabaloo surrounding this movie. Anyways, there was a lot of bullshit.
Dad, get your fucking mustache wax out while you're at it. Jesus Christ.
I did earlier. It's very curly and sexy and sensual, and it smells nice. Which is
okay, motherfucker.
It's good because it's right under my nose, so it's got to smell good all day. Anyways, now I'm just thinking about how my mustache smells, and I lost my train of thought. Oh yeah,
good Lord.
This movie had a bunch of hype when it first came out, and I was kind of like, okay, whatever. The last movie that came out, I don't know. There's hype over like every horror movie that comes out, like on Netflix or whatever, and everybody's like, "Oh my god, it's the scariest movie!" Like. What was that movie that came out earlier this year? Veronica? Did we ever talk about that movie?
We didn't, but I know what you're talking about.
Yeah, there was a ton of hype surrounding that movie, and there was all these fucking blog posts and articles where everybody's like, it's the scariest movie I've ever seen. And I watched that movie and couldn't find one part of it that was scary. So
this movie had an article written about it on BuzzFeed about how scary it was.
And there are some creepy parts to this movie. Definitely, this movie's definitely scarier than Veronica. So, but I don't know. We're not here to compare it to that because it's a totally different thing. Anyways. I guess what I'm trying to say is there was a bunch of hype when this movie came out in the horror movie community, and I kind of didn't want to watch this movie for a while because it was overhyped and overblown, and I didn't care, and I didn't want to watch it. And when I finally did watch it, I was actually pleasantly surprised at how not terrible it was. It's pretty good. It's definitely for sure, like it has all the pitfalls of a found footage movie. Like you can see how low the budget for everything was. The acting is really bad in some spots. But that's kind of where all found footage movies or most found footage movies sort of live, is in this sort of like cheesy, not very good, low budget-y kind of area. And that's like the vibe that they're really going for. So sometimes a little bit of that works to its advantage. And this movie is no different. I'm
going to take kind of umbrage with you on that because I disagree. I don't think, and again, I think that this is labeling all of found footage as one thing. I don't think that all of found footage is bad. And I think this is the conversation we need to have outright. I don't think all of found footage is cheesy either.
No, you and me have had this conversation before where I love found footage movies, but they have to be good still in order for me to love them. And the problem is that a lot of found footage movies are just bad, and they're just bad because you get somebody who's a, first-time director or something who wants to make a horror movie, and they have a cool idea, and they have a few friends that they can get together, and they can make a movie for next to nothing because they can film it on little handheld shitty cameras or whatever over the course of 5 days or a week or something, and then just edit the motherfucker together and throw in some loud noises and weird glitch effects on the camera and call it a found footage movie. Not all found footage movies are like that. There's a lot of them that are really well thought out and really cool. And we're going to be talking about some of those this month. And I think this movie is somewhere squarely in the middle of that. It has a cool idea. Some of the stuff is well thought out and the scares are executed pretty well, but it also is kind of bad in spots.
Well, and so I'm a little higher on this movie than you are, but I mean, I don't know. I'm a little bit with it when it comes to found footage and horror in general. I tend to be a little bit more forgiving on certain things like the quality of the acting. I mean, look, this is an indie horror film. This is not Hereditary. They did not have Toni Collette and Gabriel Byrne in this film. And And I think obviously that the film is going for less less highbrow acting because it's trying to convey a sense of realism.
Oh, of course.
But when the initial reason and the thing that I we always have this conversation about found footage is there are several conceits in a found footage film you have to get past before you can really, buy into it completely. And one of those conceits is that there is a reason reason that anyone is still holding the camera as opposed to helping people in these situations where there's like bodily harm or danger. I mean, a film like Cloverfield, I cannot stand it.
Oh, I love Cloverfield, but that's like, you just have to suspend all disbelief as to why somebody would still be holding the camera after all that time. I think they even mention it in the movie. They're like, what the fuck are you doing still holding the camera? And he's like, I have to document this. People are going to want to see this. And like, I guess that's as good a reason as any, but like, yeah, I don't know. You're right. The reason for somebody to be holding a camera or whatever is pretty stupid. A lot of found footage movies now will go for like the closed circuit TV angle. So there'll be like some handheld camera stuff and then some like CCTV shots. You know, just like a static shot of like a camera up in the corner of the room somewhere type of shit.
Well, and I don't think it's stupid. I don't think that it's stupid. I think it's just you've got to find a way to make it believable as to why the camera is still rolling.
Yeah,
and
exactly.
I think this film verges on getting it right. I mean, it makes sense as to why they're filming stuff in the house, in the Abbadon Hotel, because they're documenting their ritual of getting the house ready for the haunted house that they're putting inside, for the Hell House. But at the same time, it's just later in the film, you know, it verges in that territory of being just kind of a little on the hokey side and a little, the belief suspension is a little much.
Yeah. There is a part in this movie in particular where like shit kind of hits the fan, and it's before the haunt opens, and that's the point where I'm like, okay, in real life, this is where everybody bails. Like, if this shit happens to me and I'm there, or even if it doesn't happen to me and it happens to my friend and he shows me the footage, I'm gone. I'm gone so fucking fast, and everybody that I know is gone so fucking fast. Like, nobody is going to have a good enough explanation or a good enough reason for me to stay and deal with this. But then they like have some weird, and I don't know, maybe we can talk about this more a little bit later, but there's some like weird reason that never really gets explained, and then everybody stays. And then, of course, shit just gets worse, and then, you know, the end of the movie happens. So...
And again, I mean, I think the writing does, you know, Cognetti's writing is good in let me rephrase this. I think Stephen Cognetti's writing does something interesting, like you said, with the way that the film is framed, the framing device that they use of the interview with the character of Sarah, who is kind of the only survivor of this initial group of friends, and you have her being interviewed at the end of the film and the beginning and the middle throughout the film by Diane, who's a documentarian. And I think that that's an interesting way of framing the film, because it gives you kind of a reason as to why we're watching this, as opposed to, because that's the other conceit that you have to kind of get into with the found footage film, is why is someone watching this? Like, why are we watching this? Because found footage is trying to establish this as taking place in reality, in our reality.
Right, yeah.
And I think they do a good job of that. I mean, again, in the second film, I think it goes a little too, and when we get to it, it kind of, it loses its luster. You can't really do it twice.
Yeah.
The first time you do it, it's novel. The second time you do it, it begins to verge on derivative, and there are tons of horror movies that do that. I mean, derivation in horror films is kind of the cream of the crop. I mean, every horror sequel is derivative in some form or fashion. There are very few horror sequels that really kind of do something unique and different, and that's even with franchises that you and I both love to death.
Sure.
But that's the thing about this film that I do appreciate, is that it is something interesting, it is something unique, it is something different, and like you said, that's kind of, found footage seems to be a better idea sometimes than execution, and I think this film's execution is pretty good, but like you said, there are things about this movie that do take me out of it, and kind of take me out of enjoying the movie. And those things are not really, I don't know, those things are just, it feels like there's too much of a reliance on certain things in the film that don't need to be there in the kind of the quantity that they're in.
Like what? I mean, I don't know. If you don't want to blow your load right now, we can talk about it later. But.
No. Well, one of the things is the use of glitches, camera glitches.
Yeah.
Is not, it's not great. It feels like a crutch. And I understand why they're using it, because it's something that's cheap and easy to do. But at the same time, overuse of something is going to get old. There are some really really kind of scary sequences in this film, like when he's in the light tunnel and he's walking through the kind of the strobe light tunnel.
Yeah, and you see the extra person standing there in the middle who wasn't there before.
Right.
And then in certain strobes, he's there, and then in certain other strobes, he's not there. And it sort of adds to this, like, sort of, like, weird, whoa, like,
questioning,
wait.
questioning whether or not what you're seeing is reality or not. And again, I mean, this whole film comes back to this initial idea, and I mean, I've been to haunted houses, as have you. The idea about, you know, haunted houses and what if something went wrong in a haunted house, would you be able to tell? Because, you know, you're stepping into a fantasy, and it's a fantasy that's, you know, more kind of violent and gory than like a, you know, a theme park. I mean, if something went wrong at Disneyland like this, you would know, because someone dying at Disneyland is not part of the attraction, but at a haunted house, that's a different story.
Isn't that also the premise for that new horror movie that came out? It's called like Hell World, Hell something. Hellfest, that's the one.
Kind of, but it's more centered around like a serial killer stalking people.
Right, but it's like at a theme park that's Halloween themed or horror themed, right, or whatever, and so the whole thing is this guy basically has carte blanche to go around and murder people because everybody just thinks that it's part of the show.
Right, which again is an interesting conceit.
Right, and I think that there are some parts to this movie, especially because it does the whole like behind the scenes of setting up this haunt, and then the whole idea that, like, you know, they do the They do the thing that happens in a lot of movies where there's like the incident, you know, bring me back to that night. Let's talk about what happened on opening night. Like,
that's that weird framing device. But I think that framing device is successful.
But I think my problem with it is it would have been interesting if the build up to that was a little bit different. And then I think the payoff is like totally weird and out of left field and like not, I don't know. I don't think it's like worth all the build up. Like when you finally get to the end, you're like, wait, what? When I watched it, I literally had to like rewind it and go back and watch it again and go, that was it?
Well, and that kind of ties back to something else that you and I have had multiple conversations about before, and that's indie horror films. They tend to kind of peter out towards the end because they don't exactly have they don't know how to end, or they don't have a very successful third act. And this film falls into that camp. The final act of this film, the interaction between Diane and Sarah at the end of the film is just completely it's disappointing. And
yeah.
And the way the film ends, again, it's very generic for a film that really has this kind of interesting premise, and then you have this kind of generic ending, an ending that anyone could kind of see coming, and it's a little disappointing because up until that point I was really kind of on board, and then like you said, the incident that ends up taking place is not as kind of crazy over the top as I was hoping. And again, I mean, that's a lot of that is kind of restrictions due to the budget of the film. Sure. I don't think they were really going to ever be able to do a lot of over-the-top stuff with a smaller budget, especially if they're trying to use CGI, which they do have some CGI at the end of the film. Yeah. So that's kind of my big disappointment with the film, is that the end ends up being just kind of generic and seems almost like from another movie. But, I mean, ultimately, again, this found footage horror film is better than most of them.
Yeah, it's definitely better than a lot of them.
And it's definitely better than the other closest film, which is The House's October Built.
I don't know. That's an interesting comparison. The House's October Built. I think I actually like that movie better than this movie.
That movie's third act is worse than this movie's third act. That movie's third act ends up being so just kind of ridiculous and unbelievable that I just checked out completely.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. It just takes it to a, intense, totally, out of reality spot, which I guess, I mean, how out of reality is it? Like, mostly out of reality. Yeah. And I think that movie also sort of was in the same boat as Hell House LLC. When that first movie came out, there was a bunch of hype and I was like, oh, that's cool. And I watched it and I was like, oh, that's pretty good. And then the second movie came out and I was like, oh, tight, they made a sequel. And I watched it and I was like, nope, sorry. Lightning does not strike twice. And it only kind of struck the first time. So lightning only strikes 50% out of 4 times, or 25% out of 4.
And your math is astounding.
Yeah, I don't know. Whatever.
I mean, again, for me, this is kind of what we always talk about with indie horror, is that indie horror has a steeper mountain to climb up than most.
Yeah.
But once you're at the top of the mountain, you're really successful. Yeah. I mean, look at films like Hereditary, The Witch, It Follows. Those films, indie horror films, but look at how successful they were for those directors.
Yeah. And I think, but those directors all did something that I think other even smaller indie directors sometimes don't think about and don't do, which is when they come to you and they offer you a bunch of money to make a sequel, you don't do it. You just let your one thing that was good stand on its own, and then you move on to something different and something new. And I think that invariably, because nobody ever thinks about a sequel ahead of time, especially these guys who are making these movies that are so low budget, and fucking awesome. Kudos to them that they sort of made something that was successful
that we're
enough.
Talking about.
They made something that now other people that they don't even fucking know exist are talking about. Which is awesome. It's great. It's fantastic. You did something amazing. But I think the downfall to a lot of these filmmakers is it's hard to say no when somebody asks you to do a sequel to the thing that got your name out there. And you're like, oh, awesome. I have this, thing that I spent so many years trying to make, and I got my friends involved, and I borrowed a bunch of money and this and that and the other thing, and I made it happen, and I got it out, and it was successful enough to where somebody's going to pay me now a bunch of money to make a sequel to it. And that's just guaranteed cash that they're just handing you. Unfortunately, I feel like a lot of times these guys should say no. The sequel is always invariably exponentially worse than the first movie. So I think, and we'll talk about this when we talk about Hell House LLC 2, the Abbadon Hotel, that and same with the houses October built. Gosh, I'm now that I'm thinking about it, there's so many similarities between these two sort of mini franchises that whenever you try to expand on the concept and expand on the lore of the concept and the universe that you've built, it always falls apart unless you had planned it out way ahead of time and wrote about this all when you wrote the first one. When you start to introduce all these extra things in the second movie that are just extraneous and don't matter, and try to make that the focus, it just takes away from it, and it just makes me go, okay, whatever, who cares? Get to the part where it's scary.
Well, like you said, there should be a lot of applause and praise heaped on these guys.
Yes.
Because they're really making something that is hard to do, which is a successful film and then another sequel that, in Hell House LLC 2, it got it picked up exclusively on Shudder, which, again, if you have the premier horror platform touting your product, that's about as good as it gets for any horror director I can imagine. But like you said, there is this inherent issue here with the quality kind of dropping off and not expecting that you're going to have the ability to go farther down the rabbit hole with your film. And again, these kinds of film, found footage, unless you figure out a way for the second film to be interesting or novel in another way, it's going to feel derivative and it's going to kind of spin its wheels. So, well, before we talk about Hell House LLC 2, the Abbadon Hotel, what would you give the original film?
I'll give the original film a 3 out of 5. It's definitely on the better side of found footage movies. I know that it sounds like I'm shitting on this movie and this franchise a lot, which I honestly don't mean to do. I want to be critical of this type of stuff because I really like movies like this, low budget, indie movies, found footage stuff. From a first-time director, this is a really good outing for your first outing. I've seen a lot of movies from directors who are big-time directors who have millions of dollars of budget that make movies that are much, much worse than this movie. So I'm not trying to shit on everything and, only talk about the bad. I'm just trying to be critical because I want things like this to come out more, and I want them to be better when they come out. And it's a shame sometimes when they're not. Hell House LLC 1 the original, the first. It's a solid 3 out of 5. Definitely worth a watch, especially if you're a horror fan and if you like found footage movies. It's definitely one of the better ones in recent years.
So I'm with you. I'm going to give it a 3.5 out of 5. I like it a lot. I think it's a fun movie. I think it's we've been talking about, it really kind of breaks the found footage's bad mold, because this is a film that I would suggest to most people to watch. And I think that this movie is scary in parts. It has some good, interesting scares. It has some novel scares. Again, I think the concept is really unique and interesting and fun. And, I walked away from this movie wanting another movie, but not needing one, if that makes sense, which is kind of the sign of a good film. If you can tell a contained story, and if there's a sequel, great. If not, great. I don't really need one, but if you're going to give me one, I'll watch it, sure, because I think that the idea is interesting. So, I would definitely give it a 3.5 out of 5. So, we're going to take a break. We're going to play the interview I did with Stephen Cognetti and some commercials, and when we get back, we'll talk about Hell House LLC 2, the Abbadon Hotel.
Have a hunger for horror? A yen for Yelp yarns? Then give your blood-curdled bones a boon and tune in to Chronicles from the Crypt. Join sordid slime slingers Casualty Chris and Father Malone as they take on HBO's groundbreaking television series Tales from the Crypt. Here's what the rotting and rancid rabble are saying about Chronicles from the Crypt.
No!
Tune in to Chronicles from the Crypt. You have nothing to lose except your life.
Who is Carl Kolchak?
He's a reporter.
Now that is news, Vincenzo. News! And we are a newspaper. We are supposed to print news, not suppress it.
With the INS.
What's an INS?
Independent News Service, sir. Founded in 1904 by Enrico Paluzzi.
Who seems to have a nose for the strange and unusual.
Well, last year in Las Vegas, I uncovered a series of murders that turned out to have been committed by a vampire.
And what is the Kolchak Tapes?
It's a podcast.
All about Carl Kolchak.
What's a Kolchak?
The Night Stalker.
And where can you get it?
On iTunes, Stitcher Radio, and at www.kolchaktapes.com.
As foolish a game as any that Gory the Ghoul could make up.
Here's what some people are saying about the Projection Booth podcast.
Week after week, I'm mesmerized by the focus given great films and questionable films alike. But every episode is a learning and entertaining experience.
This is hands down the best movie podcast. They cover so many different genres across so many years, from obscure movies to blockbusters.
If there's only one podcast about movies and cinema that you listen to, make it this one.
The Projection Booth Podcast, with new episodes available every week at projectionboothpodcast.com.
In 1985, a curious phenomenon occurred. The Twilight Zone returned to television, featuring all new tales of mystery and imagination from the minds of Ray Bradbury, Harlan Ellison, George R.R. Martin, and Stephen King. Dreams for Sale, the Twilight Zone 85 podcast looks back at that land of shadow and substance and re-examines the groundbreaking successor to Rod Serling's legacy. Featuring new interviews with the show's creators and cast, Dreams for Sale can be found on iTunes and at twilightzone85.com. Dreams for Sale. We'll be waiting for you in the Twilight Zone.
All right, so how did you initially come up with the idea for Hell House LLC?
One of my principal funders for the movie had given me the idea. Said I was living in New York City at the time. He had done the some haunted house in New York City, and he said, it'd be a good movie is if something went wrong in a haunted house. I was like, do you have anything more? He's like, no, that's all I have, but it'd be a cool story. If you can make a story around that, I'll write you a check. So I started writing, and then, there's so many versions of the script and drafts of the script over a couple of years, though. But what I eventually landed on was shooting a documentary style and having something go wrong captured on tour-goer video and showing the chaos that way instead of like regular narrative style film. I decided to go with the found footage, found documentary route with it, and just the story evolved from there. I found this random abandoned house out in Rockland County, New York, which is right outside of New York City, right over the GW Bridge. And then I said, like, that's where Alex takes his haunted attraction out of the city, and he goes into an abandoned place outside the city. And so, like, little things like that over time, just the story evolved. And that's how we got to, Hell House LLC. Then the name Hell House is Alex is a fan of, what's his name? Robert Matheson's Hell House, the book, which I'm a fan, so I attributed that to Alex, too. So he named his company after his favorite novel, one of my earliest favorite horror novels, and that's, put the LLC on there, and then that's where you get the story.
Things didn't make the cut. What did you kind of change when you were writing it?
The first draft of the script was a traditional narrative film. It wasn't found footage film, and it was about a group of people same thing, taking over an abandoned house. But it didn't really click for me. There wasn't anything there that was drawing me to it. It just seemed very cliche, haunted housey, nothing new to it. And then I was randomly one night just going down the YouTube. You can get lost down the rabbit hole on YouTube and just viewing videos. And one of them I saw was a video of it was a real video of a concert going, like something happened at a concert and causing mass chaos and everyone trying to get out of these small narrow exits. And the whole thing was caught on a camera that was shot by actually a reporter who was there, just kept his camera rolling as everyone was trying to get out in chaos. And then I said, that's a good, what if chaos like that happened, but instead of like an event like that, it would happen at a haunted attraction. And then it introduces that idea of, well, how do you know if something goes wrong in a haunted house? Because, the whole idea is that, messed up things are always supposed to be happening. So how would you know that what you're seeing isn't part of the show? And then that idea evolved from there. And then that's where I became one of the later iterations of the script was saying, so let's start the movie with showing what happened on opening night. And then spending the rest of the film trying to figure out that mystery. So we show the chaos, what the public knows, and then we spend the rest of the movie behind the scenes leading up to that to try to figure out that mystery. So it just turned into starting off the movie with a mystery that we just try to solve. And that lends itself back to I love those Dateline NBC shows and those documentary series about crimes and stuff like that. So I kind of attributed to that. And so when I was first explaining the movie to people, I always said it's like I always explained it in a few short words of just saying it's like Blair Witch but meets 60 Minutes. It's like an interview documentary show investigating an event that has a paranormal feel to it. So, and that's how I sold a lot of people on it early on.
So you mentioned that you found a house kind of outside of New York. It's set in a physical location. What were some of the constraints, shooting there and getting the production ready and set up to film? So
the abandoned house I found outside New York City wasn't actually where we shot. I found that, and that just inspired more of the story. And that was out in Rockland County, so that's where the script is based, in Rockland County, New York. But we actually shot in Pennsylvania. And I actually reached out to the person that owned that abandoned house that I found in Rockland County and said, hey, is there any chance we could shoot there? And shooting in an actual abandoned location, especially in a small budget, just had so much logistical nightmares attached to it that I just abandoned that idea pretty quickly. And then I thought about it. I said, we need to shoot at a place that looks abandoned, but also is eventually going to be set up for a haunted attraction. So I then started reaching out to actual seasonal Halloween haunted houses, and I landed on one. And I met this woman named Angie Moyer, and she owns and runs the Halloween attractions, and it's actually in season right now. It's called the Waldorf Estate of Fear, and that's where we shot the film. And it's an abandoned hotel that she turned into a haunted attraction, so it kind of like almost exactly fit the story. And so we filmed out there, and it's just a great filming location. It really, there's so many, it's so big, so there's so many parts of it that fit exactly what we needed for the script. And then some other places and some other scenes we had to set up ourselves, especially in the basement. The basement was when I first came into it, when I was doing just some early recon, the basement was a mess. It was just littered with junk, and you couldn't even get down there, let alone open it up to film down there. So she and I, we worked on getting that cleared up, and then designing like a physical space in the basement that could be, that could fit what we needed for the script. And so some places in the hotel we needed to change the fit, but a lot of it was just like, this is actually how we need it, like keep it as it is. So we really lucked out on the location. I think that's one of the biggest pluses that happened for us in production, luck-wise, was finding that. So people can obviously really go visit the Abbadon Hotel in quotations as an actual haunt. I had heard about that. I think that's just a little bit of kind of interesting synchronicity in a way. It's cool because especially for it's in Pennsylvania. If anyone's ever around there, a lot of people have found it randomly and shot me notes with a picture of them in front of it saying like, "Hey, I found the Abbadon Hotel" and stuff. So I think it's hilarious and people are stumbling upon it. It's a real place and it's a real haunt, and they set it up differently, obviously, than what Hell House did. But if you ever do buy a ticket in October and go take the tour, you'll see you'll be right in the physical locations of a lot of the scenes that we shot. So, except for the base, they don't let anyone in the base because it's dangerous down there, so it's a liability. But other than that, a lot of the other rooms you'll see. So let's talk a little bit about the cast of the film. What was kind of your thinking when you were casting? Anyone in your mind kind of stand out in the cast when you were going through looking for people to fill the role of kind of the Hell House LLC team? Yeah, we interviewed so many people. We had open auditions for many days in New York City, and just I didn't have anyone specifically in mind, so I just opened it up, and just whoever showed up and auditioned for us, and a lot of people did, and we just started narrowing down that list. And there's some people that came in and auditioned for Paul, like the actor who plays Alex, Danny Bellini. He originally came in and auditioned for Paul, and we weren't feeling him for Paul, so we immediately landed on Gore Abrams, who was just like, we all loved immediately. He plays Paul, and we couldn't fill the role of Alex, and we're actually like a month out of shooting, maybe a little bit more than a month, but like it was coming down to the wire on Alex, and we're like, who are we gonna nobody who came in for Alex would fit Alex, and then I had this idea. I said, like, well, let's just go back and look through some other roles. And that was Danny Bellini, who came in for Paul. And he said, let's bring him in and try him for Alex. And he did. And he came in and he just did this like improv session of like being a haunt owner. And it was amazing. And he really looked like he owned a haunt. And it was just his passion. That's what he did. And he just did it all in improv. And he sold us, and that's how we got Alex, Danny, to play Alex. And then Ryan Jennifer, who plays Sarah, she was one of the actresses that just like had us at hello. It was immediate, like her first audition. We're like, that's her. That like we don't need to do any more auditions. We found her, and then we hired her on the callback, the second callback, and then. Mac, I've known and worked with for a while, as well as who's Adam Schneider, as well as Tony. I've worked with him on a few other things, and so I kind of like knew of them going in that like I know they can fill some of these other roles. They're actors in New York City that I've known for a while, and Jared Hacker played Tony, and then some of the outsider roles we we're just through it's a long process of auditions that we had to narrow down. So I'm curious when because kind of circling back, speaking of Ryan Jennifer as Sarah, was that always the kind of the framing device in the later scripts to have her as kind of the lone survivor, kind of telling Diane's character about what happened at the house and kind of pushing them in the direction of going, obviously back to the house towards the end of the film? Well, yeah, I mean that was like one in the latter parts of the rewrites that when it turned into like a 60 minutes documentary, that's when I decided that someone, it has to be narrating, telling our principal interviewee, and that turned out to be Sarah, and she was going to be the device that was to lure the camera crew back to the hotel at the end. But what I liked about that, what I thought, in movies that have done similar angles, is that they never went behind the scenes of documentary. So a lot of people who read the script, my final script, they were kind of like, wait, I don't understand. Like, we're in this documentary world, but we're also in this found footage world. And I think they're like, no, don't worry, it's going to work out. We're going to show documentary, but we're also going to be in the behind the scenes of the documentary, which we are at the end. The camera falls down. You hear a hot mic incident of Sarah saying, you should really check out the hotel if you get a chance. And she kind of like inviting them there, but it wasn't like really part of the interview. It's kind of like off, behind the scenes, hot mic-ish incident with Sarah. So Yeah, and that was the intention of her character all along. Once I locked the script, was that she was going to be the instrument the hotel used to lure more people there after the fact.
I think that is one of the more successful things about the film is the kind of the blending of documentary and found footage. Because most found footage films are played pretty straight, and there's a lot of problems with the conceits of found footage kind of are immediately ignored, and I think that's one of the things that kind of people do.
Yeah, and it's one of the things I love so much about the movie Lake Mungo. It's one of the first times I saw fake documentary horror that was just done so well, and it was such an early inspiration for me to see that someone else can have such success in the horror genre with just a found documentary, and I knew it could be done because Lake Mungo did it so successfully. I love that film, so...
Yeah, I was going to say that's probably one of the closer kind of comparisons that I've given.
It's different, and it makes it like you can't, because I wouldn't compare it to Blair Witch, because Blair Witch isn't a completed documentary. Blair Witch is recovered footage that we don't really know how we're seeing it. So it's literal found footage, whereas Hell House and like Lake Mungo is an actual completed, edited documentary that's presented to the audience. So and that's the difference between the two, and that's the difference between I think a lot of found footage is it completed, or is it just raw footage that we're seeing? And those are two different types of found footage.
Let's talk a little bit about some of the scares in the film. Obviously, you utilize the found footage kind of platform in some interesting ways that are provide some really unique and kind of really startling scares. Kind of walk me through what your thought process was in kind of getting some of those scares to be kind of amplified by using the found footage platform.
Found footage. What I love about it is you have horror, and the thing about horror is that it's just it evokes emotion. It's scary. Everyone loves fans of horror just love feeling that fear, and that's what makes watching horror movies so much fun. Though, but what I think found footage does on top of that is it adds an extra layer of realism. Like what you're watching could be real and not just a movie, a scripted movie. So the more real a scare looks, the more terrifying it is, and so that's what I love about found footage. And I think that's what made Blair Witch so terrifying is that everyone thought that was real, after you watch it. So that's why there's no really big jump scares in Blair Witch, but it's so terrifying just because it all feels real. So they were so good at doing that, so my thought process was two things. I wanted to use found footage to create a feeling of reality, authenticity in the scares, but also another way I wanted to go about the scares was I always tell everybody, every day on set is less is more. I don't like jump scares. I don't like when something like pops out and tries to startle you, or the music pops up at the right time. I like the subtle things in the background, things that like make you just send a chill up your spine. So, and that was every scare was written with that in mind. Nothing over the top, just subtleties that you might catch in the background, or in terms of like a scene like with the clown at the bottom of the stairs. The whole idea that's terrifying about it is it's just not supposed to be there. It's not that the clown is chasing us around with an axe or something like that. It's just standing there. It's not doing anything, and then that in itself is creepy, and so those are the kind of scares I like. I've always loved in all horror movies is when they do that. Like the best parts of Halloween is when the camera just is moving and you just see Michael Myers standing in the background. That's creepy. And those are my favorite kind of scares. And so every scare I wrote was always with that in mind, of less is more, and just trying to creep people out more so than just like hit them over the head with something over the top, scary.
So let me ask you, as a horror director in 2018, do you feel that jump scares and kind of the use of loud musical cues tend to be overused?
I do. I think, although I think it's getting better, and I think a lot of people are waking up to that, and both audiences and filmmakers are all realizing that it's just overused and it's not really scary anymore. So I think there's a lot of great horror out there currently in 2017, 2018 that are doing a great job of that. But I think it had in the past been overdone, and I think it's a very lazy way to get a scare. I mean, it's going to always get you to jump. Like if someone just goes rah at the right time, you're going to jump, but it's low hanging fruit. But I think that horror these days are getting smart, and it's great for us as audience members. It's just getting smarter, it's getting better, and it's getting more creepy and less jumpy, and I think that's great. So, but I think that there's been for a lot of the while horror's been sucking for a while because that's all it was is just someone popping out of a closet and chasing you, and it's been very cliche in that way.
So, I'm also very curious because this is something that very few horror films really go out of their way to do, and obviously Hell House LLC did, is establishing a mythology within the universe. How important was it for you to establish kind of an underlying mythology that's hinted at in the first film and kind of deeper explored in the second film?
I think it's it makes everything worthwhile. I think when you're watching something, especially in found footage, there's a lot of found footage that it's hard to get an audience in found footage because I think people are automatically have a stigma about it, or they're kind of, a lot of people are just over that subgenre. So you want to hook people. You have to have a little bit more going on there. So I think it's important to have a little bit more depth of story. And when you set up a mystery, it's so much more fun if there's some underlying world there. If there's something going on under the surface that's not just what you see on camera. So when we set up that mystery, what happened on opening night, it's not just that there's ghosts. It's not that it's haunted. There's more of a story to the haunting that you don't really want to show too much because again, less is more, and there's fear in the unknown. So you don't really want to answer every question, but I think this helps the story and helps the audience enjoy what they're seeing so much more if they know there's more to what they're seeing, more to the story. There's more underneath the surface, even if you don't really show them what that is, even by the end of the film, if you hint at it. So I think that's so important to having a good horror movie.
So let's talk a little bit about kind of the later half of the film. I'm curious when we finally get to the part where it's opening night and we kind of see what ends up happening, and it's been talked about the entire film up until that point about kind of what happened on opening night. Did you have any kind of different thoughts on how you wanted that to play out? What was important to you in that scene about kind of establishing the scares and kind of giving the audience kind of the big payoff that the film had been building to?
Yeah, I've read there's a lot of I've read a lot of criticism of the film is that it didn't really stick the landing in this point that you're building up to something grand, chaotic, and we didn't really get there. But personally, I think for our budget and what we did, I love what we were able to accomplish in this scene, and I think really what I wanted to do is to show that there was chaos, there was something happened, and I really wanted to get across that effect, like that. I guess it would be that chaos that would happen in a haunted attraction where you don't know where you are. It's dark. You don't know where the exits are. You don't even really know what's wrong, what's going on, but something is wrong, and you're trying desperately to get out. And I think just because the town was so great with all the extras that came out to shoot that scene and the EMTs and the fire and everything, I think we were able to pull it off pretty convincingly. But of course, at the end of the day, yes, I wish we had more of a budget and I could have done all the things that were scripted because obviously everything that was scripted was not shot because we just didn't have the budget to do that. I mean, if you listen to the in the beginning or more in the first act when they play a 911 recording and the girl says, you hear her kind of garbled saying they're pulling them into the wall. I wanted to really show more of what people were witnessing within there. And then obviously in the basement, we were actually able to explore it in the DVD release, add more of what was originally scripted in the basement. But in the original cut that everyone is mostly seeing, the Amazon and iTunes cut, is what happens in the basement we weren't really fully able to show, and we were kind of limited, because you're limited to budget, so you can only shoot what you can. And then if you try to do something that you really don't have the budget for, then it just looks cheesy. So it was another case of less is more, because when you try to do too much with a little bit of a budget, you can run into now you're just looking completely unrealistic. So So I'm really happy what we were able to accomplish on our budget and pulling off that last scene, and it's really what I was looking for. It's not originally what was scripted, but just if we had more money, we would have been able to explore that a lot more, but we weren't able to. But I like the way it came out.
As an indie horror director, do you feel like not having the budget that you kind of want, or in some respects, the bigger horror films get, do you feel like that forces you to kind of work outside of the box more and kind of be a little bit more creative with how you're going to do things, or do you see that more as a hindrance?
You have to think outside the box, and I don't. It's sure it's a hindrance, but you just have to find the best way to tell the story and get the scare across. It's obviously a problem. Every filmmaker would love to have a bigger budget, but if you have a small budget, you can make it work. Depending on what you want to shoot. So as long as you're not, we're not shooting any big CGI sequences or anything like that, the budget works for us, and it did work for us. And the scares we wanted to accomplish were very simple, and so it's not like we needed $1 million to do this. So I was fine with the budget we had, and just because we lacked some of the resources to be able to pull off some of the final chaos scenes shots that I wanted, I don't think that took away from the film. So it's not something I regret that we didn't have more money, because I like the way it came out. But yeah, I mean, I think whenever I'm writing a script, I'm always thinking about the budget. So every scene, every shot, I'm always thinking about how much money I'm going to have to do X, Y, and Z, and that definitely affects how I'm writing. And if I thought I had more money, the scenes, I'm writing more liberally, really what I want to write. And then if I think I know I'm not going to have a lot of money to shoot X, Y, Z, then I know I'm definitely writing it a different way to fit what we have. But I think also, while not taking away from it either, you're just doing it a different way. In terms of like locations, like where are we going to shoot that? Like, we don't have the money to close down this street, and so let's just not shoot any scenes that require us to close down streets. So it's just, you work around it like that, and it's fine.
I feel like being given a massive budget just kind of allows for some laziness as well, as opposed to kind of working around it and finding kind of unique and interesting ways to kind of solve a problem that money can fix.
Yeah, I completely agree. Even if someone offered us more money for Hell House, I would say I don't need it. I mean, the story we're trying to tell, we can we can definitely tell, because I think any more money would have had the potential of making it look less real. And that's what we didn't want. The whole thing was making it look as real as possible. And the more, if we added in more effects, then you run into taking away from that and making it seem like a studio film and not like real footage. So that would have been a problem too. So for this movie, having small budget, it worked perfect for us, I think.
So I'm curious about the ending of the film. With the end of the film, it doesn't, to me, it didn't seem like, and this is something that, again, I think is very successful about the film, it didn't seem like there was a necessity for a sequel, if that makes sense. It didn't seem like you'd set up a sequel. The film stands alone as kind of its own singular piece of entertainment, which a lot of horror films nowadays kind of always have like an end coda that sets up the next film or leaves it open. Was it important to you to make Hell House LLC a standalone piece, or were you kind of always in the mindset that there was going to be a sequel?
So when I originally wrote the script as a narrative film and not a found footage film, I knew when I switched it to found footage and started going about it as a documentary, there's going to be a lot of story I had to leave out and cut out, and a lot of the mythology to the hotel I had to cut out. And so there's a lot of story that was cut out when I made it a found footage film. And then when I finished the script and when I finished editing and cutting Hell House, I said I really hope to be able to tell more of the story and revisit, what's going on in this hotel with another film and, hopefully a third film, because I have the whole idea that kind of like loops around the story, all ties together, and I always wanted to do that. Hell House 1 doesn't end with anything that really says, it's very cliche and there's a second one coming, sure. But I think when it comes to the story, there's this abandoned hotel that has this history and this tragedy that happens on 2009 opening night, and then a documentary crew goes missing inside of there. I think it's only natural to assume that people are going to be curious about what's going on with this hotel. I mean, it's still there, It's abandoned. It's got secrets. People have died there, and I just think it was for me. It was more of like I want to tell the story of what's going on with this hotel post all of this that we saw in Hell House 1, and where is it all leading to? And that's where we're going to go in Hell House 3. So what's this all leading to? What's this all building up to? And how does the original movie tie into all of this that's going on? So that's where we hope to go. So
what was your reaction to kind of the fan reaction and kind of the horror community's reaction to the first film?
I was just, as a filmmaker, you always just hope to find an audience, and you never know if your little indie found footage film will find an audience. So we were all just excited when people, it started gaining steam and people seemed to be enjoying it. It was more of a relief on my end because I just made the movie with the scares that, things that scare me and how I like to see scares in movies, and I didn't know if that really had an audience at all. If other people enjoyed that as well, the things going on in the background is really like the brunt of the scares, and it turned out a lot of people did like that too. And it was just humbling to see how many people enjoyed the original movie. So I was really excited about that, and we were all really excited about that. So
yeah, I think I read an article on BuzzFeed about it, and I knew that was kind of when it had hit kind of peak mainstream.
Yeah, it kept on picking up steam, and more people started finding it, and recommending it to other people, and so that was exciting. And the BuzzFeed article came out, which we were just, of course, just thrilled by, and that's just we were just kind of overwhelmed by by how much people liked it, because you never know. You put out you make these movies, you don't know if you're ever going to find an audience, or people are even going to see it or find it, but once more people start talking about it, it was really great to see. We're all just so happy about that, and it was very humbling too.
You started working on Hell House LLC 2, the Abbadon Hotel. Was Shudder involved?
Yeah, no, the Shudder wasn't involved initially. They had acquired streaming rights, not exclusive rights, but to the first Hell House, and I think. I think they liked Hell House 1, and they saw a cut of Hell House 2, and they were they wanted Hell House 2 to be to find a home with them, because they liked the original, they liked the sequel too. So just put the films together. So when they approached us about that, I personally love Shudder. And so I was, of course, like, hey, I'm a fan of Shudder. Of course, I would love to do, put Hell House 2 on Shudder as well. So that was just a no-brainer for us.
So kind of let's talk a little bit about Hell House 2 LLC, or Hell House LLC 2, the Abbadon Hotel. What was kind of your thought process going into writing the second film? What did you want to kind of avoid? What did you want to focus on with that film?
I wanted to set up more of the mythology of the hotel, set up the groundwork for our grand finale in 3, and kind of go about going about the same way we scared people in Hell House 1, kind of trying to build upon that in Hell House 2. It's tough. It was going into it. I knew what it was making scares. Try to seem new and original, and in the same exact location that you just had. The original I knew was going to be a challenge going in, though. But I had the story, and then and I was and it took me like a year to write that out with the and add this get the scares in there. So I wanted the scares to be original into their own, and not really so tied to the first one as much as we could, even though it was tough being as though we're kind of in the same location and almost like with the same with the Hell House props that are still there, and they're just kind of like artifacts in an old abandoned. So that was I think that was the biggest challenge going in. So really what we wanted to do was set up the groundwork for 3, build the story, and the mythology of the hotel, while trying to answer some questions of the original, was really the purpose, what our focus was going into 2.
So with 2, you really kind of expand upon the end of the first film. You kind of go the documentary crew going into the film, the documentary crew going into the house idea that the end of the first film expanded on. Was that always what you were going for? Did that go through any changes, or was the documentary crew always
there was always
the Hell House?
There was always the group that wanted answers, and they wanted to get to the bottom of what happened, because at the end of 1, Diane's crew goes in there, she goes missing, but the public doesn't really know what happened to Diane. They just know there's this documentary out there called Hell House, and they don't know if it's real or fake. And so I knew I wanted to have the film debate that question: are the events of the movie within the world of Hell House, are they real or fake? And because we know there's a debate in the public about that. Like, this is a pretty scary documentary, but I don't know if I believe it or not. So that causes, and if that was going on in reality, what would happen if a movie like that came out in real life? Of course, people would descend upon it, like try to break into it, and then people would dare each other to go inside of it and see what happens to them. And so I wanted to include a lot of that, those little ghost stories you tell around the fireplace, not fireplace, the fire, I guess, of picking up a hitchhiker from Hell House that night, someone sneaking in and just seeing, someone on the stairs. It's like a small little tidbit of side story scares that just were happening in the fallout of the Hell House documentary, the original. So I wanted to include that part of it, like the fallout, the side stories of people sneaking in and out of the hotel. And also, use the documentary crew as the focus of our A-plot and they're the ones that are really after the mystery. What's going on in the hotel, and how is the hotel's owner behind everything? What happened to Hell House? What happened to Diane? Everything. So that's their purpose, and that was the purpose of the second film.
There's a little bit at the beginning of the second film that has kind of similar kind of angle to it, about kind of telling some events that are about the house, but end up kind of just being more kind of scares and setup for the later part of the second film. Kind of, how important was that for you to include something that ended up being kind of tangentially involved with the plot of the second film, but not playing directly into the A plot?
That was important to me because it ties into more of that that 60 minutes thing that I love, and it's kind of like we're seeing short stories of the Abbadon Hotel, like people's real life experiences in the wake of the original movie that have happened to them, and just very short iterations. It's like very short stories, and they don't tie into the A-plot, but they tie into the overall story of the hotel, and having people going there, always being lured there, and people disappearing there, and it's haunted past, and so it ties into the overall plot, but not to the A plot. So, but it was just another way to show that the Abbadon Hotel is just always luring people there and has its history, and it's haunted. So it's just a fun device to play with, because it shoots. It's more of like a documentary, and in that way, and we're showing these edited clips all together, showing the audience them, and we're showing them in the form of a TV show rather than the way we did in the original one.
Like you said, there's an A plot, and that kind of ends up being the driving factor throughout the film. Obviously, when you were casting the folks for the A plot, the role of Mitchell and Jessica, kind of those actors, kind of what was the casting process like for the second film versus the first one?
It was the same thing. I mean, we just had open calls, and me, one of my a buddy of mine who's been casting with me for a while, and the film's producer, we just barreled through so many actors, so many great actors. They didn't make the film because they weren't good for this role or that role, but we loved them or whatever. But we just saw so many actors, and we're just trying to place the right people. I love the cast we had, especially our main group there with Molly and Jessica and Mitchell, Joey Schatz and Jillian and Vasily there, and Dustin, who plays the cameraman, David. So it's just a fun group to work with. Such great actors. They're mostly, Joy does comedy, and this is her first. She's mostly in comedy and drama, and most of them just do drama. None of them had done something on this side. It's horror, this kind of horror, so it was new for them too. But it was just a good group of people we got together, and we keep on getting lucky with our casting. We just, you have open calls. We're not really looking for anything specific in terms of age even or ethnicity or anything. We're just looking for the best people for the role, and we always we came out with this group, and I think we lucked out again, just like we did with the original cast. Now there's a difference in the original cast, is that the original cast was meant to be good old friends that have always been together, and they meshed well in that way. They did such a great job of the original cast of seeming like they're old friends, and this new group, the audience kind of comes upon them a little bit more colder. You don't really get that camaraderie build up that you did with the original cast. So, people have a love of like Paul and all those guys. It's going to be different feeling for this cast because it's just where you just introduce them differently. And so,
who inspired the Brock Davies character? Was there a real life inspiration, or was it just kind of a little bit of a send up of?
Yeah, I think that's an amalgamation. I was thinking that if going into the hotel, there's so much energy there. And to just be investigating, trying to look through boxes for evidence, trying to find anything you can evidence-wise was not enough to explore this mystery. And I thought there always needed to be a character that's trying to explore the spiritual side of the hotel, not just the physical evidence side of the hotel. And so we interviewed so many people for this role, and we landed on Kyle, and he was just so good. He played the role so perfectly, and I told him, it's like, you never really know if he's a charlatan or not. He plays the role like right in the middle, and like he loved it. I actually I sent him a picture of Bill Murray from Ghostbusters 2 in that beginning scene when he's doing that show with the psychic and everything. Like, send him that picture, and he sent me back. He said, exactly, and we both agreed, like, this is the character. He's playing a role. He's a little bit cheesy in a way, but he does believe what he's doing too, and so he's always wanted to get into that hotel. Yeah, I even wrote a tease about him before we even like just a little bit after Hell House came out. I wrote on our Facebook page something about the character Brock Davies has always wanted to get inside the hotel, and he feels the greatest place for spiritual energy is the dining room. And the reason he feels that way is because that's where Tully had killed himself and his cult had killed himself. So even like right after Hell House 2, Hell House Original came out, I was new to the character because I was teasing it too. The fact that he's always wanted to get into the hotel to do his what his whole charade is trying to conjure up the spirits, and he attached himself to Jessica's group to do it.
Yeah, I really like that character. I was actually a little disappointed that he kind of bites it so quickly into the movie.
Yeah, no, he was so good. He was so. I remember it took a week to start filming to cast him. It was. We were running so under the gun with casting, trying to find the right Brock Davies, and we're going back and forth. And I just reached out to Kyle, and he sent me his audition tape, and I sent it to a few other people. I said, guys, we nailed it. I mean, like at the 11th hour, this is him, and he did such a great job with it too. And he was actually in the middle of doing Shakespeare in Harlem at night, and we had to like drive him out for his scene Friday night at like midnight from New York City out to Pennsylvania, because he had just finished doing Shakespeare at some like grand theater in Harlem, and we had to drive him out right from doing Shakespeare to the middle of nowhere, the abandoned hotel, to play Brock Davies the next morning. So it was pretty. I'm sure it was a little daunting on him, but he did a great job.
So let's talk a little bit about the scares in the second film, because obviously you're back in the same set from the first film. Talk a little bit about kind of creating some new scares and doing something interesting in the same environment, but not going back to the same well as in the first film.
So the whole idea is, like, when I first was approaching the script, I just went with this basic premise, is that, Hell House, the events of Hell House have happened. The hotel is still there. It's still an abandoned hotel, but it's abandoned with the Hell House props that were there in 2009. Everything that happened on that night in 2009, they're all still there, and they're just abandoned. They're just left there. So if you walk upon that hotel, what you're seeing is, everything that Hell House left there, and it's been abandoned for years, almost a decade. So how are our characters going to interact with not just coming upon an abandoned hotel, which is how Hell House came upon this abandoned hotel in the original movie, but we're coming upon 8 years past a tragedy, and the whole haunted house is still there, just more cobwebs. So I think it's just a creepy atmosphere. You're not just going into an abandoned place; you're going into an abandoned haunted house and Halloween haunted house. So I think that just adds so much more of creepiness to the place they're entering than what Hell House was originally entering. So. You have to play with that in mind. That we're just in you tease that a little bit. We got a little glimpse of that with Diana at the end of one. Obviously, when she gets there, she's amongst the props of Hell House. But 5 years after the fact. But now we're amongst the props of Hell House 8 years after the fact. And and what has changed? If we notice any subtleties to how things were aligned, how things were put together, and what's in the basement, all these years later, those clowns are still sitting there in the basement. There's like little things like that I think are like fun things for the audience to see how this whole thing, how this whole place has held up after all this time. And then from there, you just approach the scares from there.
How important was it for you to really reapproach the mythology and kind of build upon it and kind of take it in a different direction?
There's no reason for a sequel without really getting into Alex's original reasons for being out there in the first place. And that was one of the first things I wrote, even back when Hell House was just its first draft and not even a found footage film, was that something happened with Alex that got him looped into doing his haunted house in this abandoned place. And so I've always wanted to explore that more. And I thought the best way to explore that more was by this team going in there to find answers, to actually dig up a little bit of those answers that are still in that hotel. Why are these things there for Jessica and her team to gather? Why, almost seemingly too easy for them to just find all this, packed away in a box hidden in the basement somewhere. Why would a tape of Alex talking to someone in the hotel before Hell House even opened there be among those items? Little things like that. And I always wanted to deepen the mystery of Alex, answer some of the mystery of that as well. And I think that the sequel has to explore some of that. And that's why I'm happy about doing a sequel, is that I was able to answer a few of those questions while deepening the mystery of some of the others.
The end of the film, there's a huge reveal that one of the characters you see earlier in the film is actually the ghost of Andrew Tully walking around in the real world. Talk to me a little bit about how you came up with that reveal, what your kind of thinking was, and how that will eventually play into the third film.
The hotel has always used people to lure other people to the hotel. So Alex was lured there to the hotel, and the reason Alex was brought there was to get Hell House out there, and Hell House was brought out there to get more people into there in a big fashion. And the reason that Sarah reached out to Diane was to get Diane screwed. It's always going on like that. There's always people. The hotel's always trying to lure more and more people there to keep the cycle going. You can say it's to keep on feeding, if you will. And so people that have died there have been used as tools of this. In this case, it's not just the people that have been lured there since Hell House. It's one of the original people that died in the hotel, which is Andrew Tully himself, the cult master himself. Now he allegedly died in the 80s. He had hung himself. So he's coming out more and more as the story goes on, because he himself has his own grand plan, and his plan was to use himself right on camera to show kind of like in a bold, brazen fashion that he can just manipulate people right there out in the open and have them not even know it and get them to the hotel. So It's just bringing him out a little bit more was something I thought was a fun little twist to do. And then it begs the question of, like, did he die? Well, if so, where has he been? Or if not, where has he been? So it's just more mythology about Andrew Tully then, and this gateway question. So, that we explore a few times throughout the movie too. So I just thought it was a fun way to introduce him to the audience, because obviously he plays a big part in one just mentioned, and we show him in two, and we're going to bring out more of this mythology in three as well.
So at the end of the film, you have Mitchell and Jessica and Molly all in the room together, and it's a very striking scene. It's the climax of the film. It's a pretty intense scene. Kind of, was that always the case? Did it go through some reshoots or some rewriting? Kind of, is that the initial way the ending of the film was planned out?
There's always rewrites of like dialogue and everything like that, and there's, when it comes to that scene, it's a complicated scene. It was a very tough scene to shoot because of budget constraints. We had to shoot it in a very tight time frame, which is tough because it was very wordy. I'm trying to say here, it's a scene, like, I love the way we were able to shoot it, but I wish we could have explored that scene a little bit more. But we were just on a very, actually, believe it or not, we had less of a budget and less time to shoot the sequel than we did the first one. So, and that presented its own challenges, though. But that scene had always been, so we always wanted to introduce, formally, Andrew Tully towards the end of the film and the end of the third act, and bring up some of the ghosts of the past that they would mess with Mitchell's head a little bit more, like bringing back Diane and everything like that. So. You don't really see who kills who or what happens to who. Does Mitchell die? Does Jessica die? I never wanted that to be shown on film. I always wanted it to be a question. Because Tully does say one person gets to leave, and so what does that mean? Does that mean Jessica got to leave because she's there? Who knows? So I always wanted that to be left the question at the end there. But the introduction of Tully in that dining room, that's the way it was always scripted to be. The dialogue changed here and there. I've read some criticism that it's too much exposition happens, and I get that. I think the problem there that I was presented with is that it's really hard found footage to get a lot of story across when you're just doing one camera angle and found footage. So there are some places where we had to do some exposition, maybe too much in some scenes. But we had always originally wanted Tully to kind of intro himself at the end of the film, kind of giving us a little bit of, what he's doing, and that helps us set up the third one. So that was the intent of that scene.
So the end of the film, like you've been talking about, has the setup of Andrew Tully. It has the setup of some of the kind of the returning characters. How important to you was it to have the character of Alex and Mac come back at the end of the second film to kind of explain a little bit as to kind of their fates from the first film? Yeah,
I'd always wanted Hell House to be a part of this sequel as much as the ghosts of Hell House are now a part of that hotel. They're there. Their souls are there. They're always going to be part of this hotel now, and so I've always wanted to see more of them. I wish I could have gotten more of Hell House in there, but it was tough to do. So, but I knew the people I definitely wanted the most were Mac and Alex, because they're the ones that really sealed the fate for the rest of the crew. They're the ones that ultimately made the decisions to bring them out there, and then in that they sealed the fate of Sarah and Paul and Tony. So they're the most important ones of this group and the fate of Hell House. So it was really important for them to be shown in that final scene, almost in a taunting way for Mitchell.
So at the very end of Hell House 2, there's a scene with Jessica, and her character seems to be possessed. I'm not sure kind of what's the angle that plays into the third film with her character, if you can.
Well, it's just more of the hotel. The hotel's manipulations of getting people there. So at the end there, what you see is, Jessica, who we think is Jessica the whole time, is really a tool of the hotel. She's actually more of a demon, and she's trying to bring more people to the hotel. And that's her purpose there at the end. She says, I was at the Abbadon Hotel, you should go there. And the reason, and the one thing that audiences might not really pick up on is that she's looking right at the camera when her face turns. When that big reveal of her not being Jessica, but she's actually Demon, she's looking right at the camera. And you kind of like break that wall there when you do that. And there's a reason why she's looking at the camera, because she knows who's seeing this footage. She knows who's seeing it, and it's meant to be directed at this person. So, people might not really pick up on that. They might just be thinking like she's staring at the camera, but there's more to why she's staring right at the camera than you would think upon seeing it for the first time. So,
do you have a germ of an idea already where you're going with the third film? Have you started on it yet?
Yeah, the third film is written. It's done. I'm trying to contain my excitement here. I love where this story has gone, and I love how we tie everything up, and it's really just I think the scares are great. I think the scares are better than 1 and 2 combined. I'm just really, really excited about the third script and the finale. This is it. This is how the whole story ends, and it's all people will see how it's all been leading to this moment. And it will make sense. So I'm just really excited to, get to work on it and hopefully get it out soon.
So what's kind of your timeline for the third film? Do you know yet?
I don't. I think, I just finished the script actually recently. When I say finish, I finished my first draft. So what I always do is I go through it, many more times over and over. And what I do for that reason is it's perfecting the story but also trying to perfect the scares. I remember Hell House 1 took me so long to write, not because it was such a complicated story, but because I was just always trying to perfect the scares, make the scares as subtle as I always wanted them to be, and you try, leave away all the cliches of scares in horror movies, and you always try to avoid that as much as possible. So, you just work on those scares and make sure that they're good, they're original, and and audiences are going to like them, and they stay true to the subtlety of scare that I like, and. So that's what I'll be doing, working on probably for the rest of 2018 is just perfecting the script, making it sure it's exactly what I want it to be. And then in 2019, just getting going, getting it into production as soon as we can, probably, after the winter at some time. And hopefully the hope would be to get it out by next Halloween. I don't know if that's possible or not, but, we'll see. But it all depends. But that would be the ideal timeline.
And kind of with the third film, that is the end of the story. That's kind of the like you said, that's the conclusion of the entire story, right?
It's the conclusion of the entire story. Yeah. And it all makes sense when you watch Hell House. I think what it will do, it will make watching 1, 2, and 3 together so much fun, because it all ties together in a big circle, and everything makes sense. And then you see where the larger story that was going on the whole time, and so I think it'll be a lot of fun for people in that way.
I guess my last question is kind of looking at the second film has been out for about a week and a half now. Kind of what are your thoughts on the reactions you've seen on Shudder, and kind of working directly with Shudder for it to be released exclusively on Shudder?
I love that it's released exclusively on Shudder, as I said, just because I'm a big fan of Shudder. So any of my work that could be on there is always just an honor. I think I've gotten such a mixed bag of responses to the film so far. Some people love it. Some people aren't really as happy with it. They, everyone says, I like the first one better. And, I know that's just the game of sequel business. And, not everyone's going to like the second one as much as the first one. But there's a lot of people that appreciated where we're going with this, and that 2 is really the foundation of something bigger, and 3 and we're leading somewhere. So, Yeah, no, it's just been great to hear from fans, both sides. People that aren't as enthused about it, people that love it. I just always love hearing from people either way. So it's just been fun. It's just fun. You put the movie out, you sit back and you say, all right, let's see what people are going to say. And and for Hell House 1, we got such a great reaction from people. Everyone loved it, and because I think maybe because we were like off the radar and a little bit unknown, and then 2, I knew 2 was going to be really hard to really meet that expectation of people, just because it's sequels. Sequels are always tough to meet the first one, though. But I just love what we did in 2. I love the cast and the crew we had, and the outpouring of fans that love the film too. I just appreciate all the people have been reaching out to me saying, can't wait for the third one and all that stuff. So it's meant a lot too. So it's a tough but fun business we're in.
All right, so we are back, and now we're going to talk a little bit about Hell House LLC 2, the Abbadon Hotel. I don't think we can get around talking about spoilers on this, because some of the problems that I know I had with the film definitely stem from stuff that is spoiler heavy. So if you haven't seen the film yet, go check it out on Shudder, and then come back and listen to this part. It is only on Shudder as of right now. If you don't know what Shudder is, it is the streaming platform for horror movies and thrillers. I speak for probably Eric and myself by saying that I use Shudder at least once a week, probably more than that. It's a pretty good platform. They have a really good selection of not only original content, but horror movies worth watching, and kind of some stuff that you really don't find anywhere else.
Yeah.
Some really kind of like deep cut stuff. Like some stuff we're going to be talking about later this month. WNUF Halloween Special, Ghost Watch. I know they have Noroi the Curse on there, which is another really fun Japanese found footage film.
Oh, and they just put up all of the, they put up the Vengeance trilogy. It's like a trilogy of Korean sort of revenge movies from the early 2000s that includes Old Boy, Lady Vengeance, and Sympathy for Mr. Vengeance. And if you haven't seen any of those movies, I would highly suggest watching all 3. They definitely don't fit into our theme this month, but they're fucking awesome, and they are freshly up on Shudder.
Yeah, Shudder does a really good job of keeping interesting content.
Shudder is not a sponsor, but you should
not
be.
A sponsor at all. Not a sponsor, but they totally should be, because Shudder and Filmstruck I've talked about a lot in the last this month. We're going to talk about Shudder a fair amount, and then I talked a fair amount about Filmstruck last month when we were doing the samurai films. So, but with that in mind, Hell House LLC 2 right now is only on Shudder, so if you want to check it out, go on over to Shudder. Film is again written and directed by Stephen Cognetti. It stars Vasil Fluter, Gillian Gertz, and Joy Schatz, and the second film takes a little bit of a different approach to the first film. It follows a documentary crew, again, that goes into the Hell House to kind of figure out why it is the way it is. They go into the Hell House initially to look for evidence that they believe is in the basement of the Hell House. And if you've seen the first film, the basement is where all of the crazy shit from the first film happened. So right. With that in mind, we will be talking spoilers from here on out.
Alex, you lost everything. How the hell do we have a way out?
Have you ever been to Rockland County? A little town called Abbadon, just north of the GW, right along the Hudson.
Why would I have ever been there?
Because there's a hotel there called the Abbadon Hotel, and it's completely vacant.
What do you want to start a bed and breakfast?
No, Mac, that's where Hell House is going to get its second life.
This hotel has a long history of unexplained events being caught on camera.
Why do they guard it so much if they're saying there's nothing wrong with it?
I don't believe in ghost stories, but I don't want to take any chances with you guys. We're going to be in and out in an hour, tops.
These poor individuals who have gone missing were amateur ghost hunters, not trained professional investigators.
Miss Fox, you've been missing for 5 days now. Can you tell us anything you remember of how you wound up walking along on the side of the road tonight? Can you tell us anything about where you've been since last Sunday? Miss Fox.
If I say drop whatever you're doing and head for the exit, you do exactly that.
Come on. Go. Get under it.
Run! Lovely Molly's in the basement with her friends.
Oh, okay, we're leaving. Go.
There was so much blood.
So, Eric, what did you think of Hell House LLC 2?
I kind of let the cat out of the bag on this one. Not a big fan of Hell House LLC 2, the Abbadon Hotel. From here on out, we'll just call it Hell House 2, because that's way shorter. Hell House 2, unfortunately, they use sort of like the same, almost exactly the same vehicle as the first movie.
Well, they expand on the end of the first film. They take what they did at the end of the first film and blow it up into an entire full-length film.
The whole thing is you have, at the end of the first movie, the documentary crew goes to the house and then they are missing, right? They essentially get taken or swallowed or, murdered or whatever by the house, except for the one guy who stays behind to go through all the footage. And that's why there's even a movie in the first place, because that guy who stayed behind put together all the footage and all of the other stuff. Now, that guy from the first movie who stayed behind is now interviewed on some sort of like dumb cable access talk show or whatever in this movie, and some crew of like, I don't know, they're kind of like a Vice style, like documentary crew, get to the heart of the issue, blog, website thing. I don't really know.
It's like Vice. They say how in the film that Jillian Gertz's website is like Vice. It's like an expose website.
They, I guess, had done research on the Abbadon Hotel for some reason, I guess. Somebody found it interesting. And then they got in contact with the one surviving guy from the first documentary. So in this movie, the first movie is in the universe of the movie. They get in contact with him, and then they convince him to go back to the house to try and find out what happened to the documentary crew or whatever, or what the fucking deal is with the house. Like, why is it so evil? What the fuck is the deal with all the satanic undertones from the, shit that happened there before it closed? I just found that not inventive at all. And just boring. And just like 15 minutes into the movie, I was already like, I don't want to watch this, which is unfortunate because you don't want to feel that way 15 minutes into anything, let alone an hour and a half long movie. So I'm like, fuck, I still got an hour and 15 minutes left in this movie and I already don't care about anything. I thought the most interesting part of the movie is they have the sequences where there's the girl who gets out of the house, I guess, and she gets picked up by the cops and they're interviewing her and they have her on camera and she's all fucked up and she's been missing for 5 days. And so I think that's where you start this movie. You cut out all of the extra bullshit that happens before then, and who cares about, how these guys get together, and who cares about, the expose and all of this other stuff. Start it with, here's this girl who went into this house and she's all fucked up and she's been missing for 5 days and she was found on the side of the road by the cops and has no idea what happened and her memory is all fucked up, and then she's like just being interviewed by the police. I thought that was really interesting. I think if you make that like the main vehicle of the story, I think that's different than the first movie, but similar enough and interesting enough to where that would be a cool sequel idea.
So, like you mentioned, it's a little on the disappointing side that the film doesn't really do a whole lot different. It does kind of explain why the house is the way it is. And in this film, the issue I have with this film is the deconstruction of the first film's, I don't know, the villain. He's kind of a villain, but not really, because you never see him on screen. But everything that goes on in the first film ends up being attributed to one character, played by Brian David Tracy, who is his character, it ends up turning out that he's Andrew Tully from the first film at the end of Hell House LLC 2, and it's just not scary.
Yeah, he's just like, oh,
it's not scary. It's not frightening.
I'm the guy who owned the hotel, and I never left, and I never died, or whatever. And
I summoned demons. It's kind of nebulous. I mean, it's not. Again, it kind of makes me wonder what they were going for. Really, I mean, I understand what they were going for. They really wanted to imbue this film with a sense of mythology that the first film was kind of lacking. It was more hinted at.
This movie tried to go like the full Shining with this movie and just go like the hotel lures people in and then the people it lures in never leave, right
at the beginning of the film there's this whole character who ends up being lured in, and he was apparently like lured in when he was a child. It was like the hotel took over him when he was a child. Again, it's so weird because there's this sense that there's this deeper narrative, yet when they kind of present what the deeper narrative ends up being, it's just not that compelling.
It's definitely written as like a complete afterthought, which is why I said earlier in the podcast when we were talking about the first movie that my gripes with these sort of like indie properties, when they get asked to do a second movie and they feel obligated to, they get a bunch of money. So they're like, fuck yeah, I'm going to make a second movie. And instead of, when you're doing a sequel and you want to do the first movie justice and you want to expand on the universe and you want to do something that, might end up with, there are 1,000 Paranormal Activity movies and only like 2.5 of them are good. And then the rest of them just sort of like built on the mythology of the thing or whatever, which I also thought was terrible for those movies, that they kept doing that and they kept changing things and adding on to things. And there was weird timelines like...
Well, also, don't get me wrong, we don't just like films with mythology. I am all for mythology. I mean, one of my favorite found footage horror movies is Digging Up the Marrow. And that movie is so much fun, and it creates an interesting, compelling narrative that is rooted in reality, but also at the same time, it goes into kind of supernatural, fantasy worlds in a way, but it's rooted in reality. And so you can kind of understand where it's coming from. In this film, all of a sudden it goes from like demon clown suits possessed by demons, like clown suits possessed by demons, to just people standing in dark cloaks that you can't see their faces. And for the record, that's never been scary.
I don't know. It's interesting. I don't have a problem with movies that want to build on the mythology and the lore of a universe or whatever. I really like that, where a lot of other people will be like, why are you telling me this? Just get to the part where it's scary. Unfortunately, when it's an afterthought, and I can tell that it's an afterthought, and that it was something that you were like, all right, fuck, okay, now, wouldn't it be cool if, remember that thing from the first movie? What if it was really this? Like, I can tell when you just are making shit up out of your ass for the second time around just to try and keep it interesting or to try and expand on some stuff that maybe you didn't get a chance to expand on in the first movie, which I totally get. But at the same time, like, dude, I can tell. I can tell when it wasn't planned out ahead of time. And it felt like it wasn't planned out ahead of time. And it felt like it was one of those things where it was sort of like rushed to get out as soon as humanly possible. Like, there's no way that this movie started production sooner than like the end of last year or like early this year. I would be surprised if like they wrote and filmed this movie, over a year ago, Well,
I mean, and again, for me, it's just the second film, it doesn't feel different than the first film in any way that's substantial. And that's ultimately the biggest, I think, disappointment of the film, is I was expecting something a little different, something unique. And all it ends up being is just building on what we get from the end of the first film. And the end of the first film, that whole sequence with them going to the Abbadon Hotel, is the least interesting part to me. And I was a little disappointed that all this film does is just build on that in a way that's not interesting, because they end up going out of their way to demystify what the house is. And again, we have nothing wrong with mythology. It's just explaining something isn't a problem if, like you said, the explanation feels thought out and interesting and part of the universe in a believable way. Because Stephen Cognetti is building a universe with these films. He's building a universe, a trilogy of films that will stick together as one through line from the beginning of the second to the end of the second to the beginning of the third and the end of the third, because undoubtedly there will be a third one at this point. I don't think that there's any way around that. And so the hope for me is that the third film does something interesting with the narrative, because this film, as disappointed as I was by it, is still better than the first 20 minutes.
I haven't watched anything more than the first 20 minutes.
And that movie was made by Blumhouse. Which is even more disappointing.
Like I said, I think there didn't need to be a second Hell House LLC movie. I think that is the biggest problem here. I think when the first movie was made, I don't think he was thinking about where that would leave him for a second movie. I think maybe he thought about that later, but I don't think when he was writing and creating the first film, he wasn't thinking about it in the context of a franchise, however big or small or whatever. I think...
Well, and I don't have a problem with the franchise.
I don't have a problem with the franchise either, but I also think that if you're gonna build a franchise, build it from day one. Don't build it as an afterthought afterwards. And that's not to say that people haven't been successful in doing that, because that happens all the time. People just come out with a movie and they're like, oh, fuck, this movie made a shit ton of money. We got to make another one so that one makes a fuck ton of money. But at the same time, I don't know. This movie felt like this movie didn't need to exist. And I was unfortunately proven correct when I watched this movie, because all I felt the entire time I was watching it was, this movie doesn't need to exist. It doesn't add anything.
The worst thing about a film like this is that it undermines what I found to be the successes of the original film.
Sure.
And that's the worst thing a sequel can do, is hurt the original film.
Yeah, it felt like it cheapened the first movie. I hadn't seen the original Hell House in a while, since the first time I saw it, probably. And I watched Hell House 2 before I watched the original Hell House LLC, because we were going to talk about it. And I watched Hell House LLC 2, and I was like, wow, this is bad. I don't remember Hell House LLC being this bad. And it made me not want to watch the first one. And then when I watched it, I was like, oh, okay, thank God it's not as bad as the second one. But still, it was definitely one of those things where the second movie definitely made my memory of the first movie worse, which is not what you want.
No, and it takes some of the characters that you kind of identify with in the first film and paint them in a light that makes you just not care about them if you watch the first film. Namely, the character of Alex, who ends up just looking like a total piece of garbage because he sells out all of his friends to save himself from...
I don't even know, yeah. It wasn't even made clear.
Yeah, again, it's just, it undermines the successes of the first film, and that to me is the biggest disappointment about the film. Is that's what you never want from a sequel, is to do the first film, that was so successful in my mind, do it any kind of adverse harm. So, and again, we've seen this happen before with even bigger franchises, so it's not like this is just an indie thing. This is a, look at something like Star Wars. Our opinion on Last Jedi notwithstanding, that film did a lot of damage to what The Force Awakens did, one way or another. So it's this is not an indie franchise.
Be you a fan of The Force Awakens or not, The Force Awakens definitely built a lot of goodwill in the Star Wars community and went okay, you guys can make a good Star Wars movie. We trust you to make the next one. And then the next one came out and we all went, ah. Oh.
Yeah, there goes a lot of the goodwill. So, and like I said, we're going to watch the third Hell House movie. I don't think that there's
Is there really going to be a third one?
I know you'll watch it. I would assume so. If you make two movies, you're normally angling for a third. It's a second in a trilogy. So
this movie definitely did a much better job of setting itself up for a trilogy. The first movie, I felt left it vague enough so that you could make a second one, but also wasn't so open-ended that it could have been a standalone movie. And honestly, at this point, I wish that it would have stayed that way.
So I would assume we're going to get a sequel. So what would you give Hell House LLC 2, the Abbadon Hotel, out of 5?
I'm going to give it like a solid 1.5. Maybe, yeah, 1.5.
Yeah, I'll give it a 2. I mean, again, I think there are things about this movie that are not as successful as they could have been, and it ultimately just doesn't stick the landing, and it kind of just hurts the original film in some ways, namely with character development in the first film and character motive that I don't think is really doing the film any favors. So, well, we're going to take another break, and we'll play the preview for the next Culture Cast.
I'm Eddie Brock. I'm a reporter. I always seem to find myself questioning something the government may not be looking at. I found something really bad. And I have been... Eddie. Who said that? Taken.
Look around at the world. What do you see? A planet on the brink of collapse. Human beings are disposable. But man and symbiote combined. This is a new race, a new species. A higher life form.
What do you want from me?
You'll find out.
I'm so sorry. We cannot just hurt people.
Look into my eyes, Eddie. The way I see it. We can do whatever we want. Do we have a deal? Eyes, lungs, pancreas. So many snacks, so little time.
That power, it's not completely awful.
You have no idea how much you're scaring me right now.
Eddie, cooperate. And you just might survive.
Guys, you do not want to do this, trust me.
Giant leaps will always come at a cost.
I have a parasite. Yeah. Name is Chen.
On the next Culture Cast, we're going to be talking about the standalone Venom film.
Woo! Venom! Yeah!
Could not be less excited.
I'm actually cautiously optimistic, but that's just because I've been playing that new Spider-Man video game all fucking week, and it's awesome, and it's built up a lot of good Spider-Man will in me, so, but it doesn't have Venom in it.
Yeah, because I'm not sure that Venom is a character that's particularly...
Oh, I don't know. Venom was always the shit, especially when I was a kid. It was always my favorite villain. Venom and Carnage, like the symbiotes in general. I don't know. I've always thought that was like some of the cooler villains in all of comicdom, you know.
I'm more of a fan of like Green Goblin. I like Green Goblin a lot, so it's just a... Yeah, but so that movie's coming out, and we're going to have to watch that. We have no choice. Yeah, and Tom Hardy already said that his favorite 40 minutes of the film were cut out. So man, he's already decoupled the fucking train cars, and he's like, later, guys, as the train just goes off a cliff.
Yeah, that's not good when you hear that before the movie comes out, that your main actor is like, yeah, they cut out my favorite 40 minutes of the movie, and I'm just like, oh,
not exactly,
fuck.
not exactly shining support for your own film. Not what you want to be doing on the press circuit. But until then, what have you been up to, Eric? Actually, more aptly, where can people find you, Eric?
People can no longer find me anywhere on the internet. I am now gone from social media. It's true. The rumors that nobody was saying are true. I am now no longer on the internet. If you would like to get in contact with me, you can get in contact with Chris, who will get in contact with my carrier pigeons who bring letters from Chris's house to my house. That is the new form of communication that I will have with the outside universe.
I have no way of contacting Eric as well. No. But, well, unfortunately, you can't follow Eric on Twitter anymore, but you can follow me on Twitter at CultureStash. You can follow the podcast on Twitter at CultureStash, or CultureStash, Jesus Christ. And you can follow the podcast over at culturecast.com. You'll find links over to iTunes where you can rate and review the show, and to Patreon if you want to kick a couple dollars our way. Donors get access to some pretty cool stuff, so go check that out. Big thanks to Eric for the intro-outro music. It's brand new, and it's really great.
It is?
I think so.
Wait, there's new intro-outro music?
And, I used your music,
that. Cool,
dude.
yeah, there's new intro-outro music that I did. We're going to do a new intro-outro music next week, too. I don't know. I'm just saying shit.
What? Yeah, I was going to say it's very vaporware, synthwavy, it's very cool. So if you wondering where that came from, it came directly from the mind of Eric. So and make sure to check out the next Culture Cast.